Merrill Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
Hello everyone and welcome to this week's edition of the Merrill Memo. Well folks, we're going to find out today if there is the potential for significant funds to be distributed to community groups through the renewable energy projects. We're also going to find out the fact that, look, our house prices have definitely gone up, haven't they? So does that mean that we're all heading for a huge rate rise this year? We're also going to find out if our local rangers are cracking down on dog owners. That'll be an interesting one later on the program as well. Hello there, Matt. How are you this morning?
Yeah, really good, thanks. And I had a funny experience this week at Parkrun. I see you there at Parkrun most weeks, and there's usually a good crowd of people. And
it's sweating away there, like the rest of us, yes.
That's right, puffing and panting. And one of the things that's always interesting is at the beginning they ask if there's any visitors, and of course people shout out various places they come from, and that's a real Parkrun community. But at the end of the Parkrun today, it was quite funny because I had Tim Morris come over, who's one of the original. Miriam and Tim were really the instigators of Parkrun here in Dubbo.
Yes.
And Tim came and said, Matt, we need an interview because we've got some visitors from the coast. And as they go around to different parkruns in different locations, they like to have a photo with the name of the parkrun, so Dubbo Parkrun. Yes. And they'd forgotten to bring down the little frame that had Dubbo Parkrun there.
The famous little frame, yes. I know the
Correct.
Little one, yes.
Now, when I came back in as mayor again, I used to have some T-shirts before when I was mayor that had the Dubby logo on them. But I didn't think it was appropriate to wear those anymore because that Dubby logo was for Dubbo City Council.
Oh, okay. But we've broadened now, of course.
That's right, we've got Dubbo
yes.
Region.
Yes.
So we still use that Dubby logo, which is essentially the sideways D with the two dots on there to make it look like a smiley face.
Yes.
But I thought I should get something done up with the Dubbo Region written on there. So at my expense, no expense to ratepayers, I went and got a local company to print some running shirts with the Dubby logo and Dubbo Region printed underneath that.
Oh, yes,
and I use that when I run a parkrun or in particular if I'm away from Dubbo and I'm somewhere else and I might do some exercise while I'm away, I'll use that to run to keep promoting Dubbo. And, of course, without the Dubbo square, the Dubbo frame to have the photo in this morning, Tim Morris said, well, the next best thing we've got is your T-shirt.
I see you can become like the framing part of the photo,
almost. So I wasn't sure if Tim wanted the T-shirt by itself and just here's the T-shirt and I'll just stand there with no shirt for a while.
As well.
That's right. Or he said, well, they probably like the idea of the mayor being in the photo as well. So they've now got a photo with the W T-shirt with the mayor in it to take back, or I assume post on social media, but to show as they continue their travels around. So I did issue them the challenge. I said, well, I like the idea that you've been getting the name of each particular parkrun you've been going to, so that's great to keep that collection going. I said, but now you've got to start a new collection of getting a photo with the local mayor of each parkrun as you go.
That could be a whole new challenge for it.
It could be a new challenge. So I'm glad that the money I invested in having those T-shirts printed up, and I've got the same with hats. I've got some hats with the Dubby logo and Dubbo Region on those as well. Again, as I go around, I like to help promote Dubbo wherever I can. So that's the most obvious place that I've seen it actually be used now in some practical terms.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Being park runner, I fully appreciate the fact that's a terrific way to to promote the whole idea of Dubbo as well.
Yeah, good.
Well, mate, listen, you've been very, very busy this week. You've been getting around. You've been in Sydney, which we'll get to later on as well. But let's start off with Wellington. Let's start off with our brothers over there in Wellington in regards to we've talked about this, I suppose, going back a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, that the Bodangora wind farm, there was a community benefit fund there that which has been created by this group. And they, at the time, I think it was over $80,000 that was going to be distributed there to the community. Unfortunately, only a small number of people actually applied for it. It didn't actually have a chance to give away the full $80,000. But it looks as though $61,000 was given away there during the week. So this was the official cheque handing over moment, I suppose. Is that right?
It is. That's exactly right. And the big novelty checks or the medium-sized novelty checks.
Oh, you had the big novelty checks now. Really? That's pretty standard. Excellent. I love it.
And, of course, the money goes straight into the bank account via electronic transfers these days, but it still looks good.
Kids out there, a cheque, that's a piece of paper.
Well, people are a bit amazed about
it.
That, aren't they? I've had younger people say, what, you just write a number on a bit of paper and hand it over to someone, and that works. So well, you've got to have the money in the account as well. But
there are a few other factors. That's right.
It sounds like a bit of a concept, doesn't it? So we did do the handover. You're absolutely spot on. $85,000 is what that community benefit fund is up to. It's with CPI each year. It goes up each year. And this is as a direct result of the Bodangora wind farm, which was a wind farm that was put in many years ago before the concept of renewable energy zones was put forward by the New South Wales government. So this is one that predates that. So that's been good. That's money into the community each year. Now, there were a number of organisations that got this money. Now, you're spot on there. the full $85,000 wasn't given away. We do have a limit on how much you can apply per application. We may revise that limit, but we also encourage people to put the applications in. What I did do when we gave away the money, so Bodangora was there, Representative Michael from Bodangora was there, so it's good to see them involved with the cheque presentation as well. And we had all the people sitting in the room that are collecting the money, but I like to put them on the spot. And I like to say, well, here's your money, whatever amount you're getting, $1,000, $10,000, whatever it might be. But I want you to tell the rest of the group in front of you what you're going to use the money on.
Nice, there
it is. Most people, some people are a little bit nervous about standing there talking about it, but most people are so enthusiastic about the fact that they've got money, that they're going to be using that money, and it'll be benefiting the community. So most people are quite happy to jump up and talk about it. I do try and keep it to about a minute or so, but some of them go a bit longer than that because they're pretty excited about it.
Yeah.
And for some of these groups, in the past, they might have gone and sold raffle tickets, or they might have had cake stalls, lots of traditional
the typical
ways.
Fundraising sort of things we've done over the years,
Exactly right. And they're hard work. There's a lot of time and effort putting in for not a great return. So when suddenly someone says, by the way, you can have thousands of dollars just by filling in an application, it's pretty exciting. So they're getting extra things done. So there are a range of different things. I won't go through them all, but the things like Stuart Town Action Group, Wellington Junior Redbacks Rugby Union Club, Wellington Town Band, Mumble Parents and Citizens Association, all of these different groups were receiving different amounts of money, and they were doing things like buying a fridge or repairing fascias on a building. So a range of different things.
So there's some practical elements that they're actually using the money for.
Correct. And as long as we can see, and sorry, I should go back a step, there's a group that has councillor representation on that group that goes through and makes the initial assessment. As long as that group can see that it's going to be a benefit to the community of Wellington, and obviously you're going out through not-for-profit groups, community groups, not private businesses, and then finally it does come back to council for the final ratification by councillors as a group. So we do trust the advice from those committees unless it was something that really stood out as something that we thought wasn't appropriate, and that would be very unusual. Then councillors basically give the rubber stamp to what the committee recommends. But again, it's in the community, and this is a direct result. And this is what I like about it. When people go, well, that's great, we're providing lots of power, and it won't be that far away before the community around that Wellington area, around Bodangora, will be providing about 30% of the power for the households in this state. So it's a fairly significant contribution. It is. So when you look at that, I think it's only fair and reasonable that the community gain some benefits from that. So that's where we are with the one.
I was going to say, this is just one.
Correct.
And this is the point, isn't it? Is the fact I think we're looking at here in regards to this, and this is what you're saying, is that this is only one project. Now, I know we're going to talk about a few other projects later on today as well, but this is just one project for Wellington that they can benefit from. So just in regards to it, if you're sitting there now as a community group in Wellington and you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, this year we've picked up $5,000 from the community fund in regards to Bodangora. Next year, who's to say the fact that, number one, that level of funding from Bodangora is going to increase, and it will, I'd suggest, though money will continue to increase in these factors. But number two, there's going to be other groups that are going to be feeding in on this, that we're having to need to provide community funding as well. If you're in these community groups, would you advise some of these groups maybe to turn around and start to say, let's start thinking a bit more long term? Let's start thinking about the fact that we're part of a zone. This is only the starting point. If I'm in a community group here, maybe start thinking about some bigger projects, knowing full well there's going to be the opportunity now for this funding to come in on a pretty regular basis from the sound of things.
Yeah, it's a really good idea, actually. The amount, you're right, $85,000 is that amount. So next year, not only will they get the normal CPI increase, but the amount that wasn't used this year, so the $61,000 to $85,000, that difference, that'll be rolled over into the fund next year. That amount for the Bodangora Wind Farm won't change outside CPI changes each year. And that'll have an expiration date somewhere around, most of these projects have 20, 25, 30-year timeframes when that community benefit fund will stop. But as the other projects start to roll up, you might get to the stage where it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I personally would prefer to see long-term economic outcomes from these rather than just say, let's buy a new fridge for the canteen, for example. Again, those community clubs, sure, get the new fridge as well.
It's a benefit now, but we're looking here now potentially. This is long-term sort of stuff now we can start to think about, not just the immediacy.
I think that's absolutely spot on. And in 30 years' time, when these funds drop off and they're no longer in existence, my dream would be that the community of Wellington mainly is going to look there and say, we've got these things that are happening in our community now, long-term, forever and a day, that was started, the initial generation of those was as a result of the renewable energy zone that we're a part of there. So, yeah, really important, I think. But again, what I'd say to those groups that receive some money and other groups out there, just the Bodangora Wind Farm Community Benefit Fund, get your applications in for that. Well, they're not open yet, but look at that for next year's applications.
Because this is going to be going for 30 years.
In the vicinity of the Bodangora Wind Farm's already been going for a few years, so it hasn't got that long. Well, it's probably a 25-year agreement initially, so it's probably 20-odd years left, but other ones
still
will start
20
to
years,
come
isn't
on.
it? Like that's a long time, this sort of fund availability. So.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the Bodangora one, so we'll talk about other ones as well. But the Bodangora Wind Farm, congratulations to those 10 organisations that received that $61,000, and keep an eye out for those ones and other ones for
absolutely.
future years.
Now, continuing on with this discussion, during the week, the councillors got together for a workshop held here in Dubbo, and one of the main items on the agenda appears to be the Spices Creek, which is another form of this renewable energy zone. This is another project that's happening out there at Spices Creek. So I suppose in regards to the start of the discussion, number one, what was the discussion about? And again, are we looking here at opportunities here for the community here to benefit from this?
So this is a really exciting one. We talked before a few podcasts ago about a new framework that we're putting in place. Now, there's a complication that we've talked about before, that the council is not the consent authority for these renewable energy projects. We get to make comment, is about as good as it gets in terms of the process. The state government, the Independent Planning Commission, typically will make the final decision for these renewable energy projects. If it's a wind farm, then they have to have some...
So Spices Creek's going to be a wind farm?
Correct. And about 3 times the size of the wind farm at Bodangora.
Right.
So it's a big project.
Is this going to be more benefiting for Dubbo or for Wellington?
All of these are typically around that Wellington area, around Bodangora, Spices Creek. These are all... So it's Dubbo Regional Council, but they're all down around the Wellington area. That's where the hills are, that's where the wind is, and that's where the transmission lines are going to come to as part of that renewable energy zone. So all of this is focused around Wellington, which I'm okay with, because I think if we can boost Wellington and boost Wellington's economy, that will benefit the
we all
regional
benefit,
council.
don't we? Exactly right. And
It'll
let's face it, we're all
region.
part of the one group now too.
Correct, that's right. So we want to focus on how we can gain benefits out of that. So we put the framework through council where we said what we would like, it's not something that we can impose, but what we would like is 1.5% of the capital cost of the project. So
it's the capital cost. It's not profit. This is capital cost.
That's right. So if it's a $1 billion project, and that's not unusual for some of these projects to be $1 billion or more. So if it's a $1 billion project, we as council would like to see $15 million come into the community. But the way that would actually see out is not, here's $15 million, go and spend it on one project today. Do that over the life of the project. So, for example, it might be over 30 years. So let's just break that down a bit. If there was a $1 billion proposal for a $1 billion project, we'd say we'd like to sign an agreement where take that 1.5%, 15 million, divide that by 30, $500,000, but then we get that money for the community at a rate of that $500,000 and then CPI each year.
Every year.
So it's $500,000 in real terms. Now, when we talk to proponents about this, they don't have to do it. We say, please.
Are they at least in the point of discussion thinking this is a good idea, or?
Well, different for wind and solar, but for wind, they have to have some agreement in place. Does it have to be 1.5%? No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
That framework that we put in place, we're sharing a lot of information amongst the 3 councils that are in this renewable energy zone. Warrumbungle Shire Council, Mid-Western Regional Council and Dubbo Regional Council. Yeah. Already, that framework that we've resolved at council to go ahead with at Dubbo, we gave that to both Warrumbungle and Mid-Western, so Coonabarra and Mudgee if you like, and we said, here, use this if you like, pull it apart, have a variation
Did they embrace
of
that idea, or what was their thoughts?
Already, Mudgee resolved just this week to use that as their framework. Okay,
that's good.
And Warrumbungle are looking at that, they might modify it a bit and go ahead with that. So we believe the strength of that is that if all 3 councils have essentially got the same policy, that makes it easier. It's still different for wind and solar. Solar, we can say, please smile very nicely, we'd like something, and they can say yes or no. They don't have to do anything. Wind, they have to do something. Do they have to do 1.5%? No, they don't. Do they have to have some agreement in place? Yes, they do. But what's that look like? We're saying we'd like 1.5%. The first test of this, so we resolved this a few months ago, the first test of this is Spices Creek. We've sat down, we had negotiations with Spices Creek. They've said, we like the one, well, maybe not like, we accept the 1.5% because no one likes giving money away.
Give away the money away, that's right. Yeah.
We accept the 1.5%, but we'd like to see it used in this way, and it was essentially roads in a 10-kilometre radius of
that benefits
the
them,
wind
but
farm.
what about us?
That benefits them and a few landholders within a very close proximity to Spices Creek. And if you start to think about that, now Spices Creek is probably a $2 billion project. So that means maybe $1 million a year with CPI for the next 30 years on roads within a 10-kilometre radius
It'd be much
of
better if
Spices
they could go to
Creek.
community groups, I suggest.
Well,
Just
you can
coming from
imagine-
the community aspect.
You can imagine what the roads would be like there.
But isn't that have an obligation anyway to sort of look at the roads and develop those roads around their projects?
Well, it's a great question because, yes, they do. And this is the fine line that we've got to be careful to make sure the community doesn't get dudded. They have to, as part of their DA, they have to upgrade the roads to a standard that can handle the equipment they need to bring on the roads.
I'm sure that's within 10k radius as well, I'd suggest.
That's right. And some of those roads that might have tight corners and you're taking a wind turbine that's 100 metres long, you might have to round out those corners, for example. They still have to do that. Forget the planning agreement, forget the framework we've got for that. They've still got to do that as part of their DA. That's the roads that they directly go on. So when they're driving a wind turbine from, say, Newcastle Port to that location, all the roads that they travel on, they have to upgrade to that standard. But it means that other roads that are nearby those roads that they don't drive on, this could be used for that. Now, we've said we don't think that's acceptable. Let's broaden the radius, 20 kilometres, 30-kilometre radius, for example. Let's go to a broader radius and let's not focus just on roads. Yes, the roads need some work at the moment across the whole LGA. So we think this is a way for us to upgrade the roads in general, but also do other projects that might give that long-term economic outcome, but also the community benefit fund where you can apply for it to put a new fridge in or new soccer shirts or whatever it might be for those small groups, then do that as well. So where we're at the moment, still negotiating.
So it's at the early stage of negotiation.
It is.
Nothing's been finalised yet.
Absolutely right. And the DA hasn't been approved. The state government has not approved this particular project yet, so they're still in those negotiation stages. But where we think we've gotten to somewhere is that in the initial stages, we'll spend a large chunk of that money on the roads, 20, maybe 30-kilometre radius.
Yeah.
Also, that $85,000 we talked about for Bodangora, this might be, say, a $60,000 community benefit fund for those small groups to do small projects.
Which will go on top of the other 85,000.
Correct.
So this is part of that accumulating effect of this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But we still think the rest of that money, and again, we're talking about somewhere in the vicinity of $1 million
serious money
a year.
there for community enterprises and groups.
In the first 5 years, maybe a focus on roads around that region in general, not just on that 10-kilometre radius, but broaden it out. But also then start to look at other bigger picture projects. So you've heard me talk about it before, the potential for some sort of education/tourism visitation centre that talks about renewable energy, that talks about climate change, that has school groups from the northern suburbs of Sydney.
Has a potential for economic benefit for the region as well.
Long-term economic benefit. So the same way as people come and visit the zoo, kids in school groups go and visit the zoo from all across the state, kids go and visit the Parkes Telescope from all across the state from an educational perspective. I have this vision that we can have something like that around here.
And have you raised this with any of the groups at all?
Oh, absolutely. We've talked about that. And
their
none
response
of them,
to that?
All very positive in words.
Yes.
Words are easy.
That's right. Sign off on the dotted line for me, please.
Yeah, that's right. None of them are going to provide the funds that we need alone. So it's a matter for us to try and work out a way to combine some of these projects to get some of these facilities built and get them staffed and manned long term. But I think the idea here is how can we benefit the long term? Now, it might even be a project, for example, we might say some of the shops along Wellington, the CBD, the main street of Wellington, need sprucing up. And they are owned by different landlords, so it would be unfair on the community for ratepayers' money to go and be used to make these shops better. But maybe we could have a project with some of these particular proponents where we said, what about 50-50 funding? The landlord provides 50%, you as a proponent, part of that community benefit money goes to 50% to improving those shops so that even the empty shops that are there still look okay. Or it might be there's a group in Wellington, the Wellington Arts Group, maybe take some of the artworks, and you may remember that we've talked about it before, the con artists, some of the paintings done by people in the correctional centres at Wellington. Maybe those empty shops in Wellington, we're going to have a project where there are paintings in the windows of those, so it just looks a bit better. I'm really thinking as I talk here, there are lots of different ideas, but the exciting part is, from a Spices Creek perspective, is that we're actually having discussions around that 1.5%. Well, they haven't said no and shut the door on us. They're having discussions still, and we're still working on that. We might not get exactly what we want, but we're going to get some benefit for the community.
Yep.
And this is the next project. And then I think there'll be pressure on each of these different proponents, including the solar guys who don't have to do it.
Yeah, it'd be great if the government suddenly sort of jumps up and says, let's do something about this. Yeah.
But I think what will happen is I think it'll get to the point where the social pressure, the peer pressure, if you like, of all these different proponents will be they'll start to make some contribution. 1.5%, yes, that's fair and reasonable, we all think, but what it looks like, there's a lot of negotiation there. But anyway, we're going down the path, we're having those discussions, and we're getting some positive traction, which is fantastic.
Yeah, sounds good. Now, actually, keeping along the theme of the renewable energy, you travelled there to Dunedoo during the week, and you met with some of the New South Wales Farmers local branch there last Monday night. Now, there appears to be the fact that you're with some of the mayors from the Mid-Western Regional Council and the Warrumbungle Shire Council. How did the meeting go? So was this with a group of farmers who were in favour of or objecting to the renewable energy zone, what's potentially happening here in our regions?
The mood was a discussion of the renewable energy zone, which is obviously having an impact on individual farms. So there are people in the room who are impacted individually.
Yep.
I think it's probably fair to say the mood from the farmers in the room was, can we stop it now, please?
Okay, so they're not in favour of this?
Most of them in the room couldn't see advantages for them individually.
Do they get anything financially from wind farms and solar farms being put on their land? Is there a financial gain?
Absolutely, but probably the people in the room are the farmers who are probably not gaining an individual benefit.
Okay.
The farmers who are gaining benefits probably weren't in the room.
Right, okay. But, all right, that's what you're saying. Yes, all right.
But if you've got a wind turbine, if a proponent comes along and says, we've done our calculations and we think the wind on your property is fantastic, we'd like to put a wind turbine on your farm, you might get paid anywhere from $15,000 to maybe $30,000 a year.
Right, from one wind turbine.
From one wind turbine.
Yeah,
now, it varies, and that's just to give you an idea. Sometimes you're paid for the physical space that they're taking up. Sometimes you're paid on a per megawatt generation basis. There's a whole range of different ways. But just to give people an idea, a wind turbine, $15,000 to $30,000. Now, I've talked to farmers around Bodangora, for example, that have got multiple turbines on their farm, and they said during the drought of a couple of years ago, the great part about it was they knew they had that money guaranteed
income coming in, guaranteed income. Absolutely.
So a lot of them kept their stock, hand-fed their stock because they knew they had, let's say you had 5 turbines on your farm.
Yep.
You might have been getting $150,000 a year from those.
Yeah.
So you knew you had that money. So you knew you could buy feed and keep feeding your stock, your sheep or your cattle, mainly sheep around there. And so you knew that, and so you could maintain that, and you weren't going to risk financial ruin because you guaranteed that money coming in. So that puts you in a very strong position. If you've got so essentially what happens normally with wind farms is you keep your property, they'll pay you per turbine, and they'll also upgrade some roads because they need to get equipment through to those wind turbines. They sometimes upgrade fences or gates, that type of thing as well. But you negotiate that with the individual proponent, but they'll pay you per turbine. And from a farming perspective, mostly you can keep farming pretty much the same way you did before because you've lost a little patch on your farm where the wind turbine is. But
is there, like from the point of view of that, like is there a certain amount of area that a wind turbine has to have? Do they put in acreage, or like you've got to have 20 acres or whatever set aside for it? Or
no, it's just the pad that they
literally
build it
just
on.
The pad where it's on, and you can still graze your sheep amongst it.
Correct, and sometimes I've seen it where you'll get sheep or cattle who'll nuzzle up to that because it's a little bit warmer at the base in winter. They'll actually go and sit on it or lean against the actual tower itself or maybe around the pad because there's a bit of extra warmth there. So they don't seem to be worried about the turbine spinning above them at all. Solar farms are a bit different. Often with solar farms, they'll just buy the property. Sometimes they'll do a long-term lease of the property, but more often than not, they'll buy it. Now, the solar farms, the problem there, of course, is you take potential cropping land and you put solar panels on it, and it's pretty hard to keep cropping that because your header doesn't really fit down between the solar panels.
Sort of match up, do they? No,
so you are losing cropping land. Now, if it's grazing land, it's a bit different because they do try and graze between the solar panels or around the solar panels. Sometimes there's different numbers thrown out there. Sometimes they're talking about maybe you reduce your carrying capacity of that land by about 30%. So as a farmer, you might sell your land to a solar farm proponent, and then you might lease it back from them, and you pay them a small amount because you can't use it in the same way, but you might still be able to have, again, 70% of that carrying capacity. The jury's out on how much you can carry and what happens to the quality of your wool there, but there is no doubt about there is an impact on the ability for that farm to be used in the same way, in particular cropping, to a lesser extent in terms of grazing.
So if I'm sitting back here now as a farmer, and these farmers that you're speaking to there during the week, what you're saying to me sounds pretty good. Like as a farmer, I'll be sitting back going, happy days. If I can get 5 wind terms on, there's $150,000 as a short income. So I'm struggling here to sort of understand why would the farmers be objecting to this? Is it because they don't have the land that the wind turbines, these projects coming in, I'm sorry, your land doesn't do the trick for us, therefore we can't put wind turbines on it? Or like, what's their main reason? What's their point of objection?
Yeah, there's a few reasons there. I think sometimes it is a bit of NIMBY, not in my backyard. Okay. I'm not getting paid anything, but I can see the turbine, so I'm having a visual impact, but I'm not actually gaining any financial benefit out of it. The logic, I suppose, for the solar farms is we still need to produce food, and if you put solar farms everywhere, great, we produce electricity, but now what do people eat? So there is that argument, but again, I hear those complaints from people who aren't having their farms bought by solar farm operators rather than ones that are having them bought. The other one is that as part of the whole renewable energy zone, people are already building solar farms, wind farms before the renewable energy zone existed. So Bodangora is one example I mentioned before. The renewable energy zone is about getting better transmission lines, higher level transmission lines out to these areas. So this is a project being done by Energy Co, and it's basically a state government owned entity, and they're building larger transmission lines because in the past, most of the transmission was done over near the coast. Coal-fired power stations were typically along higher population areas, and then the transmission lines went up and down the coast, and we had some small transmission lines feed out to areas where we might need it out here. That's all flipping on its head because we'll be doing a lot of the generation in regional areas, and most of the power is needed back along the coast because most people live along the coast. So they're having to build large transmission lines. Now, this is where it's a bit of an issue. One gentleman in the room talked about the fact that the transmission line, so the government comes along, works out the best place for transmission lines, and they try and negotiate with farmers to say, I want to run transmission lines through your property. Again, you might be able to keep farming on some of that because it's just the actual areas where the towers are being built that you lose, but then you've got the transmission lines above you that has some impediments on your farming ability along there, but you get paid for this as well. You get paid on an ongoing basis, and I can't quote an exact figure for you for those ones.
If a power line goes through your property, the farmers do get compensated in some way.
Correct.
Okay.
One of the farmers talked about the fact that, and sorry, let me go back a step. If you say, I don't want it in my property, I don't want that to go along my property, you can get stuffed. Well, you do have compulsory acquisition power. So the state government can say, we hear what you're saying, but we're going to run it through your property anyway.
That's the castle all over again.
Exactly right. Now, if it's a solar farm or a wind farm and someone comes along and says, I like your property, can I buy that for a solar farm? And you say no, well, they move on. Or they offer you more money maybe, and then they finally move on. You don't have any compulsion to sell or to have wind farms or wind turbines on your farm. But with transmission lines, you can imagine if I need to get power from point A to point B and I go through 10 properties and one of those 10 says no, well, if that stopped the whole project, that would be terrible. So the state government with roads has compulsory acquisition powers, and local government has that with roads as well, and the state government has compulsory acquisition powers for power lines. And again, it's not acquisition, but they can run it through your property regardless. So you're better off talking to them and working out a way. But one farmer talked about the fact that where they're going to run transmission lines through his property, it made it difficult for him to keep farming the whole property because those overhead transmission lines impose some conditions that made it a bit difficult to farm on the other side. So I understand
there's genuine arguments that they're presenting here.
That's right. Yeah, there are various arguments that they might put up to do that. But again, most of the complaints are from people that aren't having things on their property because the people that are getting paid some amount of money. The issue that we had, the 3 mayors there, the 3 councils were there, the issue we had is some of the farmers said, can you please stop this? We want you to go out there on behalf of these communities and stop it. Now, Dunedoo is not in the Dubbo Regional Council area, but
you don't really have any say in that, though, do you? Do you have any power in that?
And that's exactly what we told them. We are not the consent authority for these projects. You need to get the state government in the room and have those discussions. What I said was, you can argue till the cows come home about stopping it. That's fine, but don't argue with council because we can't stop it.
Yeah.
Even if we as council put in objections to these, which sometimes we might have objections about certain issues, the state government, the Independent Planning Commission can say, sure thing, I've heard you and we're going ahead anyway. What I said, my recommendation to the farmers in the room was, it's going to happen. Coal-fired power plants are going to be shut down. Whether you have a belief about climate change or you think it's all conspiracy theory, whatever, I can guarantee one thing, coal-fired power stations are going to be shut down.
Yeah.
We're going to stop mining coal. These are facts. These are not a bit of a whim. It's happening now.
The tide's moving that way very strongly.
Correct. So what do you do about it? You sit there and keep, exactly your analogy there, keep standing at the edge of the ocean saying, tide, don't come in, and next thing you know, your head's underwater. Yeah. Or do you say, how can we gain a benefit for our community? And that's my attitude. That's Dubbo Regional Council's attitude. Yep. It's going to happen. So, for example, the 1.5% framework we've talked about, the Bodangora Community Benefit Fund.
How do we benefit from this? That's exactly right.
How do we benefit? How does the community gain an advantage from this? So rather than saying, please stop it, rather than saying this is all stupid or climate change isn't real or whatever you want to argue, it's happening. So the best way to go is, how can we as a community benefit from this? How can we get long-term economic benefits from this? If you're a farmer, how can you gain some benefits from this? How can you get the best outcome for the long-term benefits for, as an individual, for your farm, or in my case, for the community as the overall council area? And that's where the logic is, rather than try and stop it, work with these proponents to gain benefits if you accept the fact that it's going to happen. And there comes a time in any argument when you're arguing against something, when you say, I've lost the argument, now how can I flip that around and gain some benefits from it? That's where you're at. Forget the argument. The argument's over. How can you gain benefits
Sounds
for it?
like good advice, I'd suggest. Now moving on to something completely different. Rates. Well, let's just say this. Dubbo house prices, Wellington house prices, all of the house prices in the region over the course of the last 12 months have gone up. It's I saw my my valuation come through there the other day, and it's definitely gone up. A quick question for you in regards to rates. Because the land value of most of the properties in our region have gone up, and I'd suggest significantly, does that also mean our rates are going to be going up significantly? Is that a fair assessment?
No.
Oh, okay.
They will go up.
Quite brutal, but all right.
But not necessarily significantly. Very briefly, the way rating structure works is based on two things. The first thing is the state government, via IPART, gives us an amount that we can raise rates each year. They call it rate pegging.
Okay.
It was introduced around 1977 and has been a process to try and limit exorbitant increases of rates from councils for residents across the state.
Right.
The current rate pegging amount is 3.7%.
So that's the maximum level you can raise rates?
Overall.
Okay, overall. So okay, as an average.
Correct.
Right,
so the amount that we generate from rates from Dubbo Regional Council residents and businesses, etc., is allowed to go up a maximum of 3.7%. So that's the total pool. But in that pool, there can be dramatic variations.
So some people can get a higher rate increase than others.
Correct. Okay. And that comes down to exactly what you talked about, the valuation of your property. Now, it's on your unimproved land value. So it doesn't matter if you build a beautiful, magnificent mansion on your land or you build a tin shack on your land. The Valuer General has every 3 years an issuing of the current valuation of the unimproved land value. So if you knock the whatever building's on there now, if you knocked it down and sold the land underneath that, what is that land worth? And that's what your rates are based on. Okay. Now, every 3 years, the Valuer General puts out a formal valuation, and then in between times it just goes up at a CPI type amount. So recently, and most people should have received their Valuer General's valuation of their land, that was issued. Now, in some places, the unimproved land value of your particular block of land might have gone up by 30%, 40%, 80%, 100%. And I've had phone calls from people, let's say their unimproved land value from the VG went up by 50%. And they ring and they say, oh my gosh, my rates are going to go up by 50%. Well, that's not correct. It might go up by more than you expect, by more than 3.7%, depending on what happened to other land values. So as a simple example, if everyone's land value went up by 50%, then the calculation that we have for the rates...
3.7% would be everyone go. Is that right?
Everyone would have the same 3.7%.
Yep.
But where you do see a difference is when you see some people go up by 50, some 30, some 80, whatever it might be. And so we do a calculation that basically says the 3.7% that we're allowed in maximum, we apply a calculation to different categories of land. So remember that we have different categories. So, for example, it might be a rating value for the villages, a rating value for businesses, a rating value for residential. There are...
It's starting to get very complicated, isn't it?
It does get very complicated.
Yeah.
So out of all of that, you can probably say that on average, your rates are going to go up by 3.7%. But because the VG valuations came out this year, and that will apply from next financial year, there might be some winners and losers. Now, what can you do about that? There is a small amount of action you can take, potentially. If you think that your land value has gone up by an amount that's dramatically more than it should have, you can actually get an independent valuation and go back to the Valuer General, not to council, go back to the Valuer General and say, you said that my unimproved land value went up from $200,000 to $500,000. We think that's excessive, and we had an independent valuer look at it, and the figure should be $300,000. And you make application, the Valuer General will give a ruling on that, and then their ruling is final. You might also think that it didn't go up by enough because you might be trying to sell your land, so you might want it to be worth more. You mightn't want it to go up by more from a rating perspective, but you might from a selling perspective. So you've got that opportunity to do that, and you've got a certain time frame to actually make that application. When all that's done and we've got all those final valuations for those properties, we then make the rates, and we have those different categories I mentioned before, and so we then make those rates. But there will be some winners and losers. I guarantee it. Across the whole LGA, there will be some winners and losers. And one of the ones that, when I looked at a graph of different areas, one of the areas that I noticed that seemed to have some fairly dramatic increases was Geary. So the Geary area seemed to have higher jumps in their Valuer General values of their properties.
So does that mean then potentially Geary ratepayers are going to get a larger increase in their rates?
Because they seem to have more than the average rating.
Sort of outside the bell curve sort of range almost.
They were. They absolutely were. When you look at a graph across all the different rating areas we've got across the Dubbo Regional Council area, Geary stuck out in my mind as one of the higher ones.
Right, okay.
So on average, you might find that people in Geary will have a higher than 3.7% rate increase. So it's a complicated area. From council, again, 3.7%. But even in individual areas, you might see individual properties, and I've looked at some examples across different rating areas, and you do see individual properties where their rates might go down, which you don't expect. Rates have gone up by 3.7%, and my last rates were $2,000 and my new rates were $1,950. Hold on, well, that's not an increase. How does that work?
So the property the value could have gone up, but it may not have gone up as much as what the average would have been.
Correct. The property may have gone down, which I'd find unusual, but you're right. I think it's more that what you just said there, that your unimproved land value might have gone up by a bit, but other ones went up by a bit plus a bit more. So it's a complicated
So you're the beneficiary
structure
on the other side of the rate coin. Yeah,
exactly right. So yes, your rates are going to change each year. That happens normally. But keep an eye out for how it will change, and it's complicated, and we'll discuss it more with the community in terms of how that all works, but you will have some winners and losers, and there's not a lot we can do about that because it is based on that Valuer General's value.
Very interesting. That looks like it's getting very close now, Matt. The budget. Obviously, we're in the final stages of sorting out the Dubbo Regional Council budget for next year. You had a meeting again during the week. This is all part of these wonderful meetings leading up to this. Is this the final one? Are there any more we've got to do before we start to think about signing off on the budget?
Well, this is the final workshop. So it was about a 4-hour workshop, so it was pretty intense.
So it's still the workshop stage. We're still on that point.
Stage. Okay. That's right. So we had a workshop during the week. Now, that workshop will give us the final draft budget. Right. Sounds like a bit of an oxymoron.
It's a real process, isn't it? Like they really do go through a process in this.
It is, and it's a big amount of money we're talking about. So
200 million, roundabout?
Close enough too, yeah. Yep. So you want to make sure you get it right. So the process from here is that if you download the business papers for the council meeting this Thursday night, if you look at that, you'll see the draft budget in there. Now, that hasn't been resolved by council yet, but that gives you a pretty good indication of what it looks like. At the council meeting on Thursday, there will be discussions around that. There might be some changes to that budget, but this is for the purpose of public exhibition. Okay. So at this stage, all the discussions we've been having have been behind closed doors, have been workshops, been various discussions with staff, discussions amongst councillors. So we'll get to that point where we'll then say to the public, here's the draft budget, here's where we're pretty happy with it at this stage, but we want feedback from the community. Have a look
Just
at
in
it.
regards to that, do you get a lot of feedback in regards to budget?
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
okay,
typically we do.
Right.
Most of the feedback, and this is where I'd probably ask for some help from the community, most of the feedback is, oh, you're not spending money on X, Y, and Z. Can you spend some money on that?
So more specific in regards to maybe targeting certain projects.
Exactly right. And what I'd love from the community is when they say spend more money on that, well, we've got a net zero budget we're trying to achieve. So if we need to spend $1 on one thing, then what would you like us to take $1 away from? And that's the real challenge. And so as one
That's
example,
why it's called a budget. It's like a balance.
Exactly
Get
right.
the
Just
balance
like
sheet
your
right.
household budget. If you decide you're going to buy a new TV this week, you might not be able to buy that new washing machine. It's hard to add everything to a budget that you want. As an example, we've had some feedback from the community that the entrances to Dubbo don't look fantastic because we've had good rain, we've had good sunshine over summer, and grass has been growing. So it looks a bit long and untidy as you enter Dubbo. Now, I accept that. I accept that it'd be nice for it to look better. But from a budgetary perspective, we've got a certain amount of money, and we've got about 51 staff in that outdoor green space team that are working across the whole LGA to try and keep everything looking tidy. There was a decision made to reduce the amount of maintenance we do on the entrances because we wanted to keep doing maintenance on our sporting fields and on Tracker-Riley Cycleway and all the other areas that they look after. So we had a discussion during that particular workshop and said, okay, if we wanted the entrances looked after on a more regular basis at the moment, they're mowed about twice a year. If we wanted to have it done, say, every month, what would that cost us and where would we take that money from? So we went through and had that discussion, and in round numbers, it might be in the vicinity, say, of $300,000 a year extra that we'd have to find for the green space team. There'd be a bit of extra equipment as well, but extra if we wanted to keep everything to the same standard as it is now and add on the entrances, that'd be the sort of number.
Where are we going to take that $300,000 from?
That's exactly right. Now that, because those entrances are part of the roadways, we'd probably take that from the roads budget. So we'd spend $300,000 less on fixing potholes, on fixing roads. Or we could do less maintenance on Tracker-Riley Cycleway. So when people are riding through there, the grass might be a bit longer because it's not mowed as often there, and the entrances to Dubbo look a bit better. So that's the sort of...
It's a balancing act, isn't it?
It's a balancing act. You've hit the nail on the head. So when people look through that budget, and again, look through before the meeting if you like, but there might be some changes at the meeting. After Thursday, I'd strongly encourage the community to look at that budget.
How long do people get to comment?
Oh, you'll have more than a month to go through.
Okay, so you've got a reasonable amount of time.
That's right. Even if you start looking at the business papers as they come out straight away, when you listen to this podcast, basically go and get the business papers downloaded. You've got time even before the meeting, so you really have more than a month to look through that and then give some feedback. But again, that's the sort of feedback I'd like.
Do you read this feedback, or does this go to the CEO, or who actually reads the feedback?
It goes through to the staff who can make some recommendations around that, but all the councillors can see this as well.
Okay.
So we can look at that, and then when it comes to our final budget, we can then say, well, great idea from Billy Bloggs out there. He said we should be doing this and spending less money on that. That's a really good idea. Yes, let's go and put that in the budget and change the budget.
So there's still opportunities for change. Even though this is the last workshop, there's still an opportunity for change to happen.
Absolutely right. And we'd encourage that feedback. We'd encourage the community to get behind it. And again, when you want to add something to it, which typically people want to do, they want to say, can you build this or do more maintenance on that or spend more money on this, then look at where you might be taking the money from. So keep an eye on that. It is a big, complicated beast of a document, but it's a matter of one of those things that you work through it. Same as councillors do, we work through it all and look for things that you might want money spent on and put the submissions in, make your recommendations. Putting a post on Facebook is not a submission. It's not going to be something that's going to be...
Quite often that's just a rant. Yes, unfortunately.
You might be right. But if you send a formal submission through, or even if you send an email through to a councillor, that will go into that process there. So look at all that. I really recommend people look at that, and we do take notice and listen to what people have to say about it all.
Oh, that's very good. Now, Matt, it's very unlike you to be on a plane. Flew down there to Sydney town again there, checked out the new state government in there as well. You caught up with a few ministers, which I'm going to get to in a second, but just give me a bit of a briefing, if you don't mind, to myself and to the listeners out there. What's it like being in the new government house, or state government house down there, in regards to the new ministers moving in? Is it all business as usual? Things are moving along, or how are things operating down there right now with the changeover?
Chaos. Complete chaos.
Is that right? Why do I think that would be the case? So talk us through. Give me an example. What's actually happening?
So there's two parts to it. You've got Parliament House, of course.
Yes.
Now, as a separate issue, Parliament House is doing a big refurb at the moment. So you can't actually even go into the front entrance
I
of
saw
Parliament
something
House.
about that. Okay, yeah. So they're doing the upper house and lower house are all getting refurbished, aren't they?
Yeah, now that's not linked to a change in government.
Right.
That was obviously planned, and the convenient time to do it is when you've got a period of time where Parliament doesn't sit, so they're doing that. So that's one part
Separate
of it there.
sort of thing, yeah.
Separate, yeah.
Okay.
52 Martin Place is right in the centre of Sydney and is where the various ministers, the various departments often sit. So there's a lot of those departments sit there. And you don't have meetings there very often because more often than not, when we're down in Sydney, we're down at Parliament House and the various ministers you're meeting with there, they've got offices in Parliament House as well.
Right.
But at the moment, 52 Martin Place, change of government. So you've got basically all the old staff are gone, all the new staff are coming in.
So the secretaries,
all of those
everyone,
staff that might have worked for the ministers. So,
security, they're all gone.
Well, security probably would be the same,
Yeah.
but and they could change, but the ministers typically, a minister for whatever, would typically have their own ministerial staff. So once that changes of government, now if it was just a change in a minister in the same government, you'd probably keep those staff on. But when it's a change in the actual government, and what really frustrates me, and I haven't heard stories about this particular government, but I've heard stories when federal government has changed and one government department will go and shred all this information that you and I have paid for as taxpayers for it to be generated because they don't want the new government coming in and using all that same information. Right? It seems petty, I know.
Yeah, it's almost like very childish sort of thing.
Does,
this is my ball, I'm going to take it with me, you know.
It is a bit like that. But in this case here, I didn't see evidence of that. But just getting downstairs, you've got security, you've got police are always standing downstairs just to make sure you don't get some crazy people going in and trying to harass ministers. But even just the process of getting in from downstairs to upstairs, I've done it before. They've normally got a formal process. You get the visitor badge, etc. But this one, they just had a little ring binder, exercise book type thing. They're just scribbling names down anywhere.
1974 revisited. There it was.
It was like that. And I guarantee if you went back and said, who visited on this day, going back, and it was... My name was a little corner with a little box around it, just my name scribbled there in the corner and the date that I came in.
Is that right?
It did seem a bit chaotic. And then they pick up the phone.
They take the computers and everything as well, do they?
The phone system didn't work.
You're kidding. The whole lot just goes. They clean it out.
They picked up the phone to ring upstairs to one of the ministers I was about to go and see. And they rang and they went, oh, that's right, they don't have phones yet. So then they had to ring the mobile number of one of the staff up there. And then that staff member came down to pick me up. And they said, oh, look, we don't have phone systems yet. Computers, the minister only got his computer and her computer. We met with a male and a female minister, only got their computers on the day or the day before, I think it was, that we were meeting with them. So the staff aren't there. And even the staff, one of the staff members we had trouble with the swipe card getting in. And then we started going in to the boardroom to have the meeting. And, oh, no. That's storage down there. Sorry, go down this way down here. And then we walked into the boardroom and even the paintings have been removed.
Oh, so really? Took the paintings as well?
Wall. That's right.
So like that classic sort of movies, you sort of see where the painting used to be and the dust marks around the edging.
There were 3 hooks on the wall.
Oh, my God.
We haven't had a chance to put new paintings up there now. So it does seem a bit chaotic.
It's incredible.
It does. So we did have some meetings on to the more important thing.
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, that's rather interesting because for a bloke like me who's never been down there and experienced that is quite fascinating. So tell me about who'd you met? Who'd you catch up with?
So we met with a couple of ministers and it was pretty exciting so Jenny Aitchison, for example, she's the Minister for Regional Transport and Roads. Now, we've met with her before when she was the Shadow Minister, so that continues to flow on. But Jenny came into the meeting with a couple of her staff, and even her staff, she had 2 staff on loan from Transport for New South Wales because she hasn't had time to even get her own staff up and running yet. So the 2 staff
at least some people are trying to help out down there.
Exactly right. So she's got her Chief of Staff, which was someone that worked for her when she was Shadow Minister. But, there were 2 people in the meeting who Transport New South Wales, we might be here for a month or 2 while Jenny gets her staff worked out, but at least we're there. Now, she's had lots of briefings from Transport and lots of briefings internally, but she came in and she said, this is pretty exciting. This is my first meeting with external stakeholders.
So, really? Is that right?
It was her first meeting with someone external. Probably the part of it is relationship building and making sure that they know who you are. But the exciting part there was a guarantee that a pre-election commitment was $390 million for regional roads. Remember before the last government announced $280 million for regional roads, that gave us about $5 million. This $390 million, which is over 2 years, will give us about another $7 million to keep spending on our roads in our LGA. So that was good news, but it was more about just how we're going to try and solve this problem of the regional road network being in such poor state.
The ongoing problem isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So again, it's a good opportunity to continue to make sure they know that Dubbo exists.
Do you speak for the minister long? Is this like sit down for an hour, or how long do you normally...
Yeah, we had probably half an hour with Jenny.
Okay.
And so it's a reasonable length of time to go through a few issues.
Absolutely.
And I would have normally said it would have been good to have longer with Jenny, but we'd spoken to her several times recently, so she was probably aware of issues that we've got out around here anyway. So that was reasonable. The other minister we met with was Ron Hoenig. Now, I hadn't met with Ron before.
Okay. Who's Ron Hoenig? What's his role?
He's the Minister for Local Government.
Okay.
Now, the shadow Minister for Local Government was Greg Warren, and he's an old Dubbo boy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he grew up in Dubbo. He became a councillor at Camden, and then actually I think he spent even a year as Mayor of Camden.
Okay. And
he's the member for Campbelltown now. He was a shadow minister for whatever reason, behind the scenes deals, whatever, who knows, didn't end up being the actual minister.
Okay.
But Ron Hoenig's got a great history in local government. He spent about 32 years at Botany Council.
Oh, okay. So he was a councillor for 32 years.
Yeah, Botany Bay City Council. And of those, I think he was mayor for over 30 of those years.
Okay.
So good experience.
Yeah.
He was mayor up till about 2012, became a member in 2012, and he's now the minister. So good experience. In fact, Alan Smith, the former mayor of Dubbo, he said to me when Ron was announced as a minister, he talked to me about that, and he said, make sure I mention Alan's name to him. They know each other from way back, I'm sure, when Alan was mayor of Dubbo. He spent some time with Ron as mayor of Botany Bay City Council.
Yes.
So I did mention Alan's name to him, and that was a positive thing.
Excellent.
But again, it was a chance for me to meet him, hear a bit about what Ron had to say. We spent about an hour with Ron, so that was a good opportunity to really hear in depth about what Ron understood, the challenges for local government. Rate pegging, we did actually mention rate pegging. I talked about that a moment ago. And he was fairly familiar with that because he's been involved in local government for so long. As I said before, 1977, Neville Ram was the days of introduction of rate pegging. So when he first got onto council, about 1980, rate pegging was all very new. So he understood the history of rate pegging, and it's going to stay from Ron's perspective. He doesn't see a reason for it not to stay there. But good opportunity to talk about things like affordable housing, and even though it's not council's job to provide social housing, how can councils help in solving the affordable housing problem that we've got? So a good discussion, I suppose, is the bottom line out of all of that, and good just to meet those. And again, we weren't the first meeting for Ron as an external stakeholder, but certainly very early in the piece. And even the business card, so his chief of staff was there, and his business card was an A4 piece of paper with details printed on it with phone numbers and email addresses.
But I was suggesting that situation. Poor old Ron, he'd be probably feeling quite at home, though, with the old paper and pen. If he's been hanging around the local government scene for many years, this would be pretty normal for him. It'd be
well, I
old
actually
school
think
sort
Ron's
of style.
Quite progressive. He had a hybrid vehicle many years ago before they were popular.
Oh, really?
So I think Ron's quite progressive. Look, I was pretty impressed with Ron in terms of the direction, and again, we'll keep talking to Ron further about different things and different opportunities.
So tell me, how do you set up these meetings? Is this your own personal contact list of people that you know? You can talk to people down there to make up these meetings? Like, how do you access these ministers so quickly? It's
a challenge. There's no doubt about it. It's really a combination of everything you've got. So contacts that you might have, contacts that you might have, for example, our PA, it might just be, my PA might just be contact that department and see if you can line up a meeting. And sometimes you can be lucky and sometimes not lucky. We've also got regional cities, New South Wales, which I'll talk about in a moment as well. And we've got a secretariat there, and they might try and make some phone calls to line up some meetings. Everything that you can think of, it's really just a process of multiple contacts from multiple directions, and then see if you can line something up. And from their perspective at the moment, new ministers, they're probably keen to talk to various councils around the area to find out information because it's very new for them. They've been in opposition for 12 years, so they're probably keen to find out information as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. Now you mentioned just then in regards to regional cities, so you were obviously down in Sydney and you went and caught up with these ministers, but there was another reason you were there, because you're also the chair of the Regional Cities New South Wales. So tell me, who is this group and what's your role with these guys?
So that was the main reason for me being in Sydney. When I was going to Sydney, it was Thursday, the meeting with Regional Cities New South Wales. So that was when we reached out to some of the ministers to say, well, on Wednesday, I can fly down a day early and meet with some of those. I was going to be in Sydney anyway. So that actually worked out quite well.
Well, it's very timely then, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So Regional Cities New South Wales is a group of 15 cities if you remember the old Evo Cities days, that started with 7 cities, this is probably the grown-up version, if you like,
of Evo Cities. Right.
Evo Cities
where
started,
it's expanded too. Okay.
Yeah, it started that collaboration with 7 cities around the state, and it was so successful that other cities were knocking on the door of Evo Cities saying, well, it seems to be working for you 7 cities. Can we be part of this as well?
Oh,
so it's expanded now to 15 cities. So we meet regularly. Now, this meeting was delayed. The last meeting we were going to have was not long before the election, but we didn't see a lot of point because often we will get some of the various government members or ministers come along and talk to us. So we delayed this one. We knew we wouldn't get any government members or ministers along at this one because it's all so new for them at the moment. The ministry was only sworn in early April, I think 5th of April. I think it was only announced.
Well, they're still trying to work
April.
out their computers and phone lines.
That's right. So regional seats. So we still had the meeting, and it's a discussion, a good chance for those 15 cities to sit around and really talk about common issues that we might have, various aspects.
Are there common issues popping up?
Absolutely, and not always across all 15, but we might have some issues across something that might be brought up by one council that might be across 10 of them. And so, for example, one of the projects that we put in for some government funding and we were successful was a program that we call Transport Pinch Points. Now, if I see in Dubbo Regional Council areas of transport where I say that might be a bit of a pinch point, might be a bottleneck in our transport network, it might affect people in Dubbo Regional Council, but it might have a bigger impact on people travelling through Dubbo Regional Council. So the 15 cities, we talked about this being a problem, but because we've all got our own boundaries, it's hard to get money out of the state government for a project that is probably more important statewide rather than just in our individual city. So we put together a proposal, took it to the state government and said, we want a number, which was just below $500,000, to put some sort of business case together to say where the pinch points are, where the bottlenecks are, if you like, across the state, and then we want to build a case on how much it might cost to fix that. So that might be a $1 billion project, but to argue the case, we need the numbers.
Yes.
And when people travel, when they're taking goods from one particular area from point A to point B, they might go across 5 different LGAs. So it's hard for each individual one. So that was a project we put forward to the last government. They approved that, so they've given us $500,000 to run with that project. And so again, across 15 cities there, this is something when you're driving your goods from point A to point B, you don't care if you're going through 3 or 4 different LGAs. You just care about where those bottlenecks might be, or if there's a problem with a road in some area, flooding, for example, do you have alternative routes? And that might be an issue where you might need to build some alternative routes to take care of some of those things where you might have problems. So all of these things.
So it's that strength in numbers sort of an idea, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. So
in isolation, hard to get, but together as 15,
correct,
you've got a chance to get something.
We had another issue, which more or less was an update on. We had some issues with the planning portal, the New South Wales Government planning portal, and some processes there. So again, we put a small task force together from the 15 cities. They address that, and then with some communication back to the New South Wales Government, they make some changes to that portal. Again, for a government, our pitch to them is we can make it easy for you. Rather than go and talk to 15 individual councils, 15 individual mayors, talk to us as a collective, and where we've got some common issues, you can get those solved for 15 different councils, or maybe only 10 of those, or maybe 12 of those. But that's more efficient than trying to talk to 15 individual councils.
So does this group as well, do they advise groups like Tourism New South Wales? Is that part of the linkage type thing as well, to promote regional New South Wales through tourism?
So one of the things that will happen as time goes on, and this group's only fairly new.
Oh, okay. So this is newly established. One
of the things that will happen is you will start to get some of those groups come and seek advice from us. Now, we do get groups who come along, and so NBN, for example, at our meeting on Thursday, NBN came along with some new things that are happening around NBN. They came along to talk to 15 councils because that's easier for them to talk to them rather than go along and talk to 15 individual councils. So it was a good chance to update some things that are happening in fixed wireless, some increases in speed and increases in range, for example, with fixed wireless, and how you might be able to do projects together with council and NBN. So some organisations take advantage of the fact that they've got all the councils sitting in a room together, so they might want to come along and talk to them. Now, we don't want people that are just trying to sell a product.
I was going to say, because that's the other problem potentially, is that you've got 15 major groups there together with a huge potential audience. Yeah, you could get anyone wanting to come along and say, oh, there's a group to go along and speak to. So do you have a vision for the group? Like, what's the goal of the group?
It really is just to promote regional living, to promote benefits for regional living. We want to keep moving population out of Sydney, for example, out to those regional areas, but keep getting more money spent on the infrastructure in those areas to make those areas more livable. One of the issues, which I think we've actually got partly solved now, we've been talking to the government, the last government, for over a year or more about some of their projections for population growth in the Department of Planning. Now, we've seen this problem in Dubbo for a long time, when we look at the Department of Planning figures, they have areas that are going to grow very slowly, maybe negative growth in some circumstances. And then we look at what happens on the ground and we're seeing positive growth, good positive growth. And years ago, we got Bernard Salt, the demographer, to do a project that we as Dubbo City Council paid for to show just how wrong the Department of Planning projections were. Now, why do we care about the Department of Planning not having any idea what they're doing with numbers? We care because the government makes decisions around hospitals, education, schools, teachers.
Based on this groups and what their projections are.
Based on policing, based on the Department of Planning. So a government doing good planning for the state will say, now, where are my growth areas? Where do I need to have more schools? Where do I need to have more hospitals? The Department of Planning says, here you go, sir. Here's the information we've got. And we as a group have said, that information is wrong for regional areas. You're constantly getting growth that's wrong or negative when it won't be negative growth. So we've had a bit of success there because the Department of Planning has started to revise some of those numbers upwards now.
Oh, okay.
And so at the next...
Based on what your feedback has been?
We've really been banging on about it for a while and had ministers in the room in the past talking to them and saying, you've got to get these numbers right. Yeah. Even from a development perspective.
Well, so important to get those numbers right. If you're living out here, big time.
That's right. If I'm a developer and I'm looking where I might invest some money, if I see that areas aren't going to grow that well, I might stay away from them in development. But if I see good growth in areas, I might be more likely to go to those areas. So again, good meeting, lots of good discussions around a whole range of different things, and that group is getting more strength. And I think we're probably only a year or so away from getting to the point where we'll start to get phone calls from ministers, from government departments, from, as you say, Tourism New South Wales, those sort of organisations to say, we've got an idea. What do you think of that? How will that work with your members, do you think?
Oh, I like it. Now, Matt, I must admit, for me, this has been a bugbear. Whenever I take my dog for a walk down there, maybe on the Trackarali track and walking around down there, the beautiful riverbank areas, I tell you, one of the things that has really annoyed me over the years is when I'm walking along and all of a sudden a dog will come up to my dog and I'm there sort of trying to pull the thing apart, and all of a sudden the owner turns up all very apologetic. Well, mate, look, I'm sorry, but get your dog on a lead. Like, that'll solve that problem. We've got no issues then. So this has been an issue around here in town for a while. You know, the owners of their dogs, we all have our dogs. We've got to take our responsibility of our dogs with the leads. Is it getting to the point now where the rangers have had enough and they're saying, right, listen, we've warned you people enough. You walk along there's all the signs up there saying, get your dogs on the leads. The council and the rangers there, is it finally to the point where they're going to start to fine people with not having these dogs on leads?
It's actually happening already as we speak.
Can I say, you beauty? I'll put it out there. And for anyone out there who's disappointed by that, I don't care. Get your dog on a lead.
And we've got signs on Trackarali, for example, that say dogs on leads, pick up after your pets, all sorts of things like that.
That's right.
And a friend of mine who was a bit like you, a bit frustrated, not so much with their own dog, but just out walking or running on Trackarali and just constantly having dogs rush at them. And the owner will say, oh, it's all right, they won't bite. But just by having them rush them, they might trip over or they might try and avoid that dog. I actually was bitten on Trackarali one day by a dog when I was out going for a run. Yeah, that's right. And the dog jumped up and actually just bit me on the thigh, and only a little nip. But I got home and had a look, and there was a bit of blood there. And it was just annoying. And I was just like, damn it! Like, that was
that's right. It didn't need to happen. That's right.
So we've got the signs out there. A friend of mine said they're just going to start wearing a T-shirt that says "Dogs on Leads" because so many people are there, and if you say something, if you say something to people, then they get a bit annoyed about it. But our rangers can go out there and not just say something to people; they can actually find people. So they've been doing a few targeted patrols based on feedback from residents of Dubbo.
Excellent.
And they've been targeting things such as dogs off leads along the river, along
happy days, perfect.
They've also been targeting stray dogs around some of our villages. We've seen a bit of that.
Yes.
And even overgrown blocks. Now, the overgrown blocks issue is an interesting one. I get phone calls sometimes from people who say, can you tell the neighbour to get their block mowed? It looks disgusting. Now, we can only do that if it's unsafe. Now, it could be unsafe because it might be harbouring snakes, for example, or vermin. So it could be, but it's a fine line as when it looks ugly compared to when it's unsafe. But we can suggest or persuade people to go and do that. So we've been doing that, and the rangers have been out there actually patrolling some of these areas, going out in the mornings, for example, when you're out walking your dogs and you see those people with dogs running around, running amok, as you've talked about before.
Yes.
And so they've had some unhappy people that rangers have been talking to them. But again, it's a bit of a message. But what's actually been happening, which was great, is that our green space operations team who are out there amongst these areas a lot, they've been actually passing on a bit of feedback to the rangers, just saying that they are actually noticing a decrease in the number of dogs that are off their leads. And that might encourage... Yeah, that might encourage...
Working.
It is working. A few more people
to take my dog out again. That's excellent.
That's what I was going to say. It might encourage people like yourself that might have gotten to the point where you're a bit over it. You might say, oh, well, that's good. If those other dogs are going to be on leads, I'm happy to take my dog out again on a lead and go for a walk. So it might encourage it a bit more. So it doesn't sound nice necessarily to be out there fining people and generating revenue for council. But I think it's one of those things that just stick to the rules and you don't have to worry about it.
That's exactly right.
You don't get many speeding fines if you stick to the speed limit.
Absolutely.
It's the same case here.
Well, Matt, we've reached that time of our little podcast. And, of course, it is time now for the Limerick of the Week. So, my friend, what do you have for us this week?
With so much talk about renewable energy zones and the benefits we might get for the community.
Podcast here today, didn't it?
That's right, it did. Then let's go and hit it with a limerick about that.
Love it.
In a town where funds were quite tight, renewable energy brought them some light. Community groups thrived, their projects revived, as green money made their future bright.
Well done, well done. I love it. It actually is so timely in regards to it there. So, folks, that just about finishes up for this week. Have a wonderful week out there this week. Enjoy what has been this spectacular weather right now. Get out and enjoy it. And, of course, we'll see you all next week for the Merrill Merrill.
Merrill Memo with Matthew Dickinson from Dubbo Regional Council.